Hello. I want to talk today about how the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, February 20th, 2026, is likely to impact America and why America may be in for a rough ride over the next few years. So just give me a minute to share my screen. I've got to get rid of some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. Almost there. Hold on just another second. And I'm ready to go. So this is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in America. My thoughts for the Mundane Astrology Special Interest Group, Part 3. And my name is Christopher Benton. All right, I want to start with this two horoscope wheels here. And the one on the right is of the solar eclipse that occurred on March 29th, 2025. And the one on the left is the chart for when the American Civil War began. And notice that when the American Civil War began, Neptune was at 29 degrees 57 minutes of Pisces. And on the solar eclipse last March 29th, Neptune was at 29 degrees 58 minutes Pisces. Only 1 minute of arc separating those two positions. So at this point in time, the solar eclipse was activating America's Civil War point. And there has been more and more discussion in recent years about civil war in America, speculation wondering if we're headed toward another American Civil War. Well, a lot of people think that we are already experiencing a soft civil war. And I asked artificial intelligence about that. And this is basically what it came up with. It said, the evidence of a soft civil war currently going on is political polarization, rising political violence, institutional breakdown, media fragmentation, and successionist fantasies. So whether we have a hot civil war or a cold civil war, there is a lot of unrest, worry, and disagreement in America right now. Now, I have some dates here when these points will be activated, and I'm talking about what I call the Civil War point, the eclipse point, and when Neptune enters or exits Aries. The day after the American Civil War began, Neptune entered Aries. So anytime Neptune is entering Aries, that is going to be a sensitive point or event for America. And at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction on February 20th, 2026, Saturn and Neptune will be in that first degree of Aries. So this is one reason why I expect it to impact America in particular, because that degree has special significance for America. Now, here are the dates. Neptune was at the Civil War point on March 28th, at the eclipse point on March 29th, and entered Aries on March 30th. And then later on, Neptune turned retrograde, and it has already gone through the second list of dates, exited Aries, went back into Pisces on October 22nd, was at the eclipse point on the 23rd, and was conjunct the Civil War point on October 24th. And then those sensitive points will be hit again in 2026 on January 24th, January 25th, and January 26th. Now, I have a graph of the stock market, S&P 500, over here, showing year to date since January. And I have a couple of points circled. This first point, we see the stock market reaching a certain peak and then dropping off quite a bit. This happened right after the third Chiron return, which took place on February 17th of 2025. We had two prior Chiron returns in 2024, one shortly after the presidential election, and then in 2025, right after February 17th, when we had that third and final Chiron return, the market fell. And then we see an even bigger fall of the market here. This is following March 30th, 2025. 2 days later, on April 2nd, Donald Trump called it Liberation Day, and he announced all these across-the-board tariffs he was putting on numerous countries around the world. And he wasn't using tariffs like a laser. He wasn't pinpointing specific industries that he wanted to protect. These were all across the board for the most part. And everyone got very worried about that, and the market plummeted. Later on, Trump pulled back on those tariffs. He delayed implementation of a lot of them, used it as leverage for negotiations, and that is still somewhat ongoing. Okay, now let's look, I believe, at what happened around October 22nd through 24th. Again, I consulted artificial intelligence. I believe I used Microsoft Copilot here because it's very convenient if you're in the Windows environment. And around those dates, the government shutdown tensions intensified. Remember, we were in the middle of a government shutdown. I even called October the month of wounding at one point. Also going on, U.S. ranchers protested a new beef import deal with Argentina. The east wing of the White House was demolished between October 20th and October 23rd. And President Donald Trump's administration finalized a $40 billion bailout package for Argentina on October 20th of 2025. And this was going on while at the same time Trump was not wanting to provide financing for SNAP benefits, what we used to call food stamps, and many people were feeling nutritional insecurity, hunger. Okay, so in October we had that government shutdown. We had inflation. Prices were still going up and up at the grocery store. Beef prices are still incredibly high per pound. And a lot of Americans were realizing how much their insurance premiums were going to go up for next year as a result of various government subsidies being discontinued by Trump's, quote, big, beautiful bill. Okay, so there's a lot going on in America to be dissatisfied with in October, and that intensifies, at the very least, this soft civil war. Now, before I go any further, I want to talk about which chart to use for America. And I believe at astro.com you can find at least 12 different charts that people have used for America. There may be more now. And one reason is because the creation of America was not an event that just suddenly happened. It was a process that took place over time. There was the debate on the resolution for independence, its passage, the public announcement of it. Years later, there was the writing and acceptance of the United States Constitution. Before that, I believe there were Articles of Confederation. These were all important moments in the development of America. And all of these different charts can have an impact. Now, most people these days tend to use what is known as the July 4th, 1776 Sibley chart that has Sagittarius rising. And I think this one does have an impact. I have a little bit more of a preference, though, for the July 2nd, 1776 chart. set up for 11:50 a.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is about the time that the Continental Congress passed the Declaration or Resolution for Independence. This is when independence was essentially decided upon. 2 days later, there were some edits made to the final wording of the document. Those were approved. And then the announcement was made that the colonies were going to be independent from Britain. So it seems that July 4th is when things went public. And because of that, I tend to think of the July 4th chart as describing more America's persona, its outward personality, while the July 2nd chart says a little bit more about what America is on the inside. And aside from the changes in rising sign and house cusp, not much is going to be different between these two charts, except for the fact that in the July 4th chart, the moon is in Aquarius, while in the July 2nd chart, the moon is in Capricorn. Now, this fits rather nicely. If we think about America's public persona and how we Americans like to think of ourselves, we think of ourselves as leaders in technology, humanitarians, we're very charitable, and we're always exporting the ideas of freedom and democracy to the rest of the world. That is how we very comfortably like to portray ourselves to others and to ourselves. But in reality, we're also very controlling. That's an aspect of Moon and Capricorn. We have a very shameful history with slavery, where we tried to control African slaves and exploit them in this country. We at times engaged in genocide against the Native American population of this country. We had camps that we sent Japanese citizens to during World War II. And there are all sorts of different immigrant groups that we have oppressed from time to time. And of course, right now, if your skin is brown, if you look Mexican or as though you're from some other country in South America, the courts, the Supreme Court has said that you can be stopped on the streets and asked for your proof of citizenship. They can do racial profiling now in America. And of course, America oppressed women for a long time. And of the various groups in America, women, I believe, were the last to get the right to vote. And even as recently as 1970, a woman could not get a credit card without her husband's approval. Okay, so we have tried to control various segments of our own population throughout our history, and we have also tried to control other countries. At times, we were infamous for going into other countries and staging coups, overthrowing the leader, whether they were a dictator or elected democratically, just so that we could put someone in power that we thought would be more favorable to America and America's business interests. And when we stopped doing that, we have continued to use our soft power, our economic power, to try and coerce other nations into doing things the way we want them done. So anyway, I see both charts as relevant to America. You don't have to choose one over the other. You can choose both. As I've said, I tend to use the July 2nd chart more often, but I will also show you what is going on in the July 2nd chart. I'm sorry, the July 4th chart on various dates. Okay. Now, I've mentioned one reason why the Saturn-Neptune conjunction will probably impact America a lot, simply because Neptune entered Aries the day after the start of the American Civil War. That makes it a very sensitive point for this country, and that is where the Saturn-Neptune exact conjunction is going to take place. But also, If you look at the solar arc directions to the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, in 2025 and 2026, we have Neptune making a sesquiquadrant to natal Saturn, and Saturn is making a square to natal Neptune. Consequently, if there's anything of note going on in the skies with Saturn and Neptune, America is going to have a certain resonance with that at this point in time. Saturn-Neptune things are forming the backdrop in many ways for what is happening in America. And keep in mind that Saturn creates structures, it builds structures, while Neptune dissolves structures. And for a variety of astrological reasons, we are seeing a lot of structures dissolving, being done away with intentionally, others just simply breaking down on their own in America. So this is another reason why the Saturn-Neptune conjunction could impact America quite a bit. And there are more reasons. Now here I have a biwheel. On the inside, I have that July 2nd, 1776 chart for America. On the outside is the February 20th, 2026 Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And look at where Venus is in this July 2nd chart. It's at 0 degrees of Cancer. And this conjunction is taking place at 0 degrees of Aries. So we have a square that is exact to the degree here. Venus is not just the pleasure principle. It's not just love, romance, having a good time. It's the things we like and what we don't like. And that establishes a map for ourselves of what we consider good and what we consider bad. And this, in turn, creates a nonverbal view of the world and things we value. And I associate all of that with our nonverbal right brain. Venus says a lot about what our gut feel about things are, whether we like it or whether we don't, what our values are. With Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Aries, structures are aggressively being broken down to be replaced by new structures and new ideologies, and that is not sitting well with a lot of the American public. And that is one reason why so many Americans in polls are saying that the country is on the wrong track. And this is why Trump's approval ratings in the polls are also going down quite a bit. This is at least one astrological reason. Now, if we look at some of the other important aspects going on, aside from transiting Saturn and Neptune square natal Venus, we also have the transiting lunar nodes square natal Uranus. The lunar nodes always intensify things. Uranus has always been associated with revolution in America and war and aggression, either at home or abroad. Uranus was being activated, this point, 8 degrees Gemini for Uranus on July 2nd, 1776. That point was being activated during the American Civil War, and it was being activated during World War II when we were working on the Manhattan Project. Okay, and the square from the lunar nodal axis is going to be poking at it on February 20th. It's exact to the degree also, so there could be some revolutionary fervor in America. People will be ready to revolt over certain things. They may get violent, but Uranus is in Gemini. Hopefully it will just be angry rhetoric, or there could be aggressive actions taken abroad by America. Now, the other thing going on here is transiting Chiron is square natal Mercury and Moon. It's not quite exact. It's a little bit over a degree away from being exact. We had this aspect a couple of times in 2025, And what happens most likely is that Chiron will wound us. With a square to Mercury, it can wound commerce, and Mercury rules the ninth house in this chart, so it could also affect foreign relations. And I think our relations with other countries have been strained quite a bit, even though the ambassadors and the leaders will be all smiles because they would rather have Trump on their side than working against them. And with Chiron squaring the moon in the fourth house, it's the homeland and the people there being impacted. And a lot of people are feeling wounded now from being laid off from government jobs, industries going bankrupt or going into recession, most likely. And the cost of healthcare, this has a lot to do with people's health also. Healthcare is going up. And just to make matters a little worse, transiting Pluto is making a strong sesquiquadrate to natal Mars, and that too is exact to the degree. This is not as strong an aspect as a square, but it is going to cause some irritation. And this can lead to outbursts of violence or aggression within the country, or aggression that we direct toward others. Now here's the same sort of biwheel, but this time I've put the July 4th Sibley chart in the center. And even if you use this chart, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction will probably impact America quite a bit, because in the Sibley chart, this conjunction is taking place very close to the cusp of the fourth house. Let's see, the cusp of the fourth house is at 1 degree, 3 minutes of Aries. So that is going to be just about 18 minutes of arc from where this conjunction takes place. So that is pretty darn close. It's also going to be in opposition to the midheaven. So this might also represent dissatisfaction with the executive branch at this time and with Trump. But this can signal in this chart that a lot of structures in the homeland are going to be dissolving. A lot of the ways we've been doing things in the past may be going away. Now, the moon is not going to be squared by Chiron in this chart, because the moon is in the natal chart is an Aquarius and not a Capricorn, but it will be squaring Mercury pretty strongly. So again, it can affect commerce and trade, monetary policies. And it's interesting that in the Sibley chart, Mercury is fairly close to the cusp of the eighth house. Eighth house has to do with death, transformation, other people's money, and debt. We may have big problems with the national debt in America beginning next year. Problems even bigger than what we already have. And let's see, what else do we have here? We have that Mercury rules the seventh house. That has to do with others and other countries. It also rules the ninth house here, which is also foreign countries. So there could be more difficulties ahead in America's relationships, its relationship with other countries. By the way, it was a video by the great British astrologer Steve Judd that pointed out to me that in the Sibley chart, Saturn and Neptune were going to be conjunct the cusp of the fourth house. I hadn't seen that because usually I'm looking at the July 2nd chart for the passage of the Declaration or Resolution for Independence, when the decision is actually made. But this chart, as I said, is also relevant. And so I want to give a tip of the hat to Steve Judd for pointing this out to me. Now, these are some dates when Saturn will be exactly square Venus and when Neptune will be exactly square Venus in the July 2nd, 1776 chart. And we have, let's see, one of these dates is February 17th. That is going to be just 3 days before the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And let's see, Neptune is going to be squaring Venus on February 9th of 2026. And I've written here that Neptune square Venus can result in fanatical beliefs, disinformation, discontent, and Saturn brings more frustration and discontent. Neptune, these adverse aspects from Neptune can cause people to become quite zealous, quite fanatical about things that they believe to be true but really aren't. So this can be a very dangerous time for us when people's values will be challenged and they will likely feel that things are going on which don't meet with their values or their anticipations. Okay. I think we're going to see this date, February 17th, coming up again in a few minutes. Or let me go back here. I think I looked at it in a previous video. Let's see where the sun is here on these transits. And where is the moon? This chart. Oh, the moon is over here, just sort of covered up by one of my circles. I think on the 17th we had a solar eclipse. So if that's right, then if we have Saturn exactly squaring Venus in this July 2nd chart for America, at the time of that solar eclipse, that is going to make the impact stronger. Things will be more intense. Frustration will be greater. Okay. Here are some graphs which show you when Neptune will be square Venus and when Saturn will square Venus in 2025 and in 2026. A 1-degree orb is being used here. And you can see that Neptune square Venus was pretty strong from September into November. And so I had anticipated that we might be having some budget problems, some problems in Congress at this point, because I knew that they were going to have to find more money for the government or else shut things down. And sure enough, we had the government shutdown. It turned out to be the longest shutdown in America's history. And these aspects are going to continue into January and February of 2026. And as I've said, Saturn, transiting Saturn square Venus will happen just 3 days before the exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And the July 4th Sibley chart, these are the dates when Saturn will be exactly conjunct the 4th house cusp. And these are the dates when Neptune will be exactly conjunct the 4th house cusp. And Saturn conjunct the 4th house cusp, that comes 3 days after the exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. And then Neptune will be conjunct that cusp on March 1st, 2026. And I've written that Neptune conjunct 4th house can result in dissolution of structures in the homeland and zealous opposition to those in power. Saturn brings restructuring. And here are the dates and periods when Saturn and Neptune will be conjunct the cusp of the 4th house in the Sibley chart, which means they'll also be in opposition to the midheaven and at odds probably with the executive branch of government and Donald Trump in particular. Okay, so keep these periods, these times in mind. Now, there's something else interesting going on with progressions. If I look at the secondary progressions for the July 2nd, 1776 chart, What stands out is a square between progressed Sun and natal Mars that starts at the tail end of 2025, gets stronger in 2026, and is still strong into 2027. This can create a warlike atmosphere in this country. This can create a lot of anger and aggression being used either at home against the people living here or abroad. And we have certainly seen things ramping up more recently with attacks on boats around Venezuela and Colombia. They are alleged drug traffickers. Some of them probably are, but some of them could also just be fishermen trying to catch some fish, make some money for the day. And we are told that they are, quote, narco-terrorists, but no evidence has ever been presented to back up those claims. Nonetheless, using a 1-degree orb, this square between progressed Sun and natal Mars, it's going to get stronger and stronger throughout 2026 and peak on November 12th. This is interesting because this is going to be around the time of the midterm elections in America. So there could be more violence in America at that particular moment in time. Now, if we're looking instead at the progressions of the Sibley chart, that July 4th, 1776 chart, then within a 1-degree orb, progressed Sun square Mars, that starts earlier. And you could argue that this maybe fits the timeline better because in mid-June, we bombed some facilities in Iran. And we've gotten increasingly aggressive, it seems, since then. But on the other hand, you could also say that the movement of Uranus into Gemini in early July could have been responsible for some of these earlier aggressions. Because when Uranus moves into Gemini, America is ready to fight either abroad or at home. So either way you look at it, there is a warlike atmosphere that is increasing in America. For the Sibley chart, this aspect will be exact on March 4th. And it could be that all of this aggressive rhetoric reaches a peak by March 4th, or it could happen closer to November 12th, or it could happen on both dates. Again, we don't have to choose one chart over another. I am fairly convinced that they are both relevant. So we can have both charts. It's not this chart's right, the other's wrong, or vice versa. Okay. As I've said, America tends to find itself embroiled in conflict whenever Uranus goes into Gemini, and particularly when it goes through that Uranus return at about 8 degrees Gemini. That is where Uranus was around July 2nd, July 4th, 1776. Now I have dates over here for when Uranus will enter or exit Gemini. It entered Gemini this year on July 7th. It's going to retrograde back into Taurus on November 7th. Well, we've gone past that date, so it's in Taurus now. But on April 25th, Uranus will go back into Gemini, and it's going to stay there for good for several years. And then over here are the exact dates for the Uranus returns that will occur in 2027 and in 2028. And during the past Uranus returns, we were involved in the American Civil War or leading up to it. And let's see, in the years from 1943 to 1944, well, America got involved with World War II in 1941, a few months after Uranus entered Gemini, But in these years in particular, we were very, very involved in the Manhattan Project. We were trying to enrich uranium in order to make the world's first atomic bomb. Uranus, uranium, seems like there's a connection there. Okay. Now, if we look at this chart, on this chart, this is for January 6, 2021, when Rogers stormed the Capitol. In the center, I have the July 2nd, 1776 chart. I'm putting this bi-wheel out here just to show you what an impact the lunar nodal axis can have on things. The lunar nodes always intensify things. And on January 6th, whether you use this chart or the Sibley chart, Uranus was square the lunar nodes to the exact degree. If you use the July 2nd chart, the transiting lunar nodal axis was conjunct natal Mars to the exact degree. So lunar nodes always intensify things, and on this day, the tendency toward violence and revolution was intensified quite a bit. Okay. Here, I want to show you what has happened during past hard aspects of Pluto to the lunar nodes. And I'm putting this in here because before too long, we're going to have transiting Pluto conjunct the south node in all of the July 1776 charts for America. The last time Pluto was conjunct the south node was during the American Revolution. Pluto was square the nodal axis during the buildup and prelude to the American Civil War. And it was conjunct the north node during World War II and the Manhattan Project. And it made another square to the nodal axis during the mid-80s. This was a time when Ronald Reagan was president, and tensions between Russia and America were increasing. And those folks who maintain what they call the doomsday clock, they were moving the minute hand closer to midnight on the doomsday clock. But something remarkable happened in 1987. On August 17th, 1987, that was allegedly an important date on the Mayan calendar, which became known worldwide as the harmonic convergence. On that date, many, many people around the world engaged in either solitary or group meditation. Many people made pilgrimages to sacred sites. And just a few months after that, Reagan and Gorbachev met for the first time, and they became best friends. And all that tension, all that rhetoric coming out of Reagan and others, it just went away. Thank goodness for that. That shows us perhaps some of the power of meditation when everyone engages in it, raises himself to a higher level, and then everyone else begins to tune into it and is influenced by that. Okay. Pluto is going to be conjunct America's south node 5 times from 2027 through 2028. And we will have 3 Uranus returns from 2027 into 2028. And so you see there is going to be an overlap here. You know, it's almost as if the Pluto returns in 2022 weren't enough. The Chiron returns almost as if they weren't enough in 2024. 2023, let's see, 2024 and 2025. It's almost as if the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the start of Aries, a civil war hot point, and squaring exactly natal Venus in that July 2nd chart isn't enough. We're also going to go through Uranus returns and Pluto conjunct the south node during the same time period. So this is a very difficult time for America. And in 2025, here are aspects from Chiron that we have already been through at this point, but this shows a lot of wounding that has been experienced by the country this year. In July and August, we had Chiron square Pluto. Pluto represents the country's power, but also the most powerful person in the country's leaders and the president in particular. And Donald Trump's approval ratings really began to plummet, I believe, this past summer. In 2026, we have another round of Chiron square Moon and Mercury in that July 2nd, 1776 chart. They'll happen around the same time in March 20th through 22nd. On May 2nd, we have Chiron square Pluto. That could affect America's power or Trump again. This will be repeated in November, actually late October, last, say, week and a half of October through almost mid-December. This is going to be a longer period of time, so more wounding to Trump or America's power at this time, most likely. This summer, we have some very important things going on. One is good, but the other is not so good. We have a couple of oppositions of transiting Saturn to natal Saturn. Now, this can be a time of karmic return. This is a time when frustrations in the country increase. And in the past, I have seen things like wildfires, environmental disasters, and mass shootings increase whenever natal Saturn is being activated in an adverse way. Now, in the bar over here, there are two dates, and it looks like it's saying that one of these will be exact on July 29th and then again on August 23rd. This is a little glitch or bug in the program that created this. The 23 should be over here. It's July 23rd and July 29th when transiting Saturn will be exactly opposite natal Saturn. And what's happening here, you can see this period is so long. Roughly almost second half of June through the end of August. Saturn is moving very slowly at this point because in between July 23rd and 29th, it turns retrograde. So it's basically at a standstill when these aspects form. This will likely cause a lot of frustration for Americans this summer. But this is the interesting twist. And this one is happening only in the July 2nd chart, not the July 1st chart. I'm sorry, not the July 4th chart. In the Sibley chart, Venus has moved on a little further. But in the July 2nd chart, you're going to have this very extended sextile between Chiron and Venus. And it lasts from about the second week of June through the first week of October. Chiron is going to be moving slowly because between July 1st and September 5th, it's going to change direction. And so it's moving very, very slowly here, makes two exact sextiles to Venus. And this can be a very favorable period. This is the kind of aspect that will likely bring a lot of healing to people. Now, at the same time, and I'll talk about this in another presentation because this is going to be sort of linked in with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. There are also some very, very favorable trines and sextiles going on in the world in July and August. Configurations which began in summer of 25. The main one is a minor grand trine where we have Uranus, sextile Neptune, sextile Pluto, which is then trine Uranus. When this minor grand trine began, Neptune was conjunct Saturn within 1 degree of arc. It wasn't exact, but it was impacting everything. It was a conjunction that was strong throughout the entire summer of 2025. This is when we got something of a taste of this particular conjunction. And so we had in summer of 2025, Uranus sextile Saturn and Neptune. Those planets sextile Pluto, and then Pluto trine Uranus. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is entangled with this more favorable minor grand trine that is forming. And July 21st is a day with so many good aspects that are exact to the degree that the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau called it the most harmonious day of the century. So while the rest of the world is experiencing great harmony in July, America is going through this Saturn opposition, which can be very difficult because it's lasting so long. Perhaps we'll have an economic recession, for instance, at this point in time. But at the same time, in America, there is some sort of healing going on. I don't know exactly what shape that healing will take, but there will be something happening which is help healing the way people feel about things, changing their attitudes, soothing their values. We'll just have to wait and see exactly what happens. Outwardly, in business, we may be collapsing, but inwardly, people may be meditating, connecting with that still small voice within, and finding some spiritual nourishment. That is one possibility. Okay. Let's see. This is just looking at some transits on July 29th, 2026. That is when one of those Saturn oppositions will be exact for America. But this is just looking at transits in general. Sun and Jupiter are very strongly conjunct. That's going to be very good for the world. They're in opposition to the moon and to Pluto. The opposition to Pluto is not quite so good. That is going to intensify the tension. Pluto is a planet of death and transformation. We also have a very strong square between Mars and Venus on this day. For some, that will increase the desire, the expression of physical romance and love. Some will experience this in a positive way. Others might feel that things are happening which go against their values, and that could lead to aggression. But we have good aspects. We have this Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, minor grand trine, which is strong. We have a Sun, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, minor grand trine, which is strong. And we have Chiron making a sextile and a trine to the lunar nodal axis. So these beneficial aspects will help release tension, not only throughout the world, but also will probably help America cope better with whatever it is going through. And America will have a lot going on at this time. Transiting Saturn is exactly opposite natal Saturn. The transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be making a semi-square and sesquiquadrate to natal Saturn, so that is going to intensify the frustration. And let's see, we have transiting Sun and Jupiter will be conjunct the lunar nodal axis. That might turn out to be a little bit more positive since Jupiter is such a benefic. Okay. And transiting Uranus, though, is making a semi-square to natal Chiron. That can cause some sudden wounding to arise of one sort or another, perhaps from revolutionary activities of one sort or another. And transiting Mars is going to be squaring Neptune. Now, this one concerns me because in the natal chart for America, in both of them, we have Neptune and Mars making a square. I believe in the Sibley chart, I believe the Sibley chart has Mars at 21 degrees Cancer. So if so, then this transit by Mars will be an exact conjunction to Mars in the Sibley chart. But whenever Mars or Neptune in America's natal charts get stimulated, that can lead to aggression as a result of misinformation or passionately held beliefs, which are often not correct. On the good side, though, we have transiting Chiron making that sextile to natal Venus. This is going to be exact to the degree on this day. And as I've pointed out, the opposition between transiting Saturn and natal Saturn is going to last quite a while. And the sextile between transiting Chiron and natal Venus is going to last an even longer period of time. One of these is going to be hard and frustrating, the other healing. What exactly happens? What brings about the frustration or the healing? I don't know. This is just the weather. I can tell you the weather, but I don't know what people are going to do with their own free will. But it looks like people are going to be finding some way to heal in the midst of all this frustration. Okay. Let's see. In 2027, we're going to have Chiron squaring Pluto. Again, that could affect the presidency or America's power. Pluto will be in opposition to the North Node, meaning they'll be in conjunction with the South Node, and that can be a very dangerous time for America. And we have a period here lasting from about the second week in February through almost the third week of August. So 2027 is going to be tense in many ways. And then we have 2 Uranus returns in 2027. One on July 23rd, another on November 8th. And let me go back here just a second. I want to look at something. Yeah, here in 2026, when we have Chiron square Pluto on November 11th, if I didn't mention it before, this should be closely after the November midterm elections in America. So this is going to be pretty strong during the midterms. And if this weakens President Trump, perhaps those midterm elections will wind up electing a lot of Democrats to Congress. That's one possibility. But it's interesting that this is happening around the time of those midterms. Okay. We have Saturn square Pluto. Pretty much July through most of September. We have Chiron making a sextile to Venus within a 1-degree orb during a couple of periods in 2027. It looks like in 2027, the most difficult time is going to be in July. But there's a lot of difficulty throughout the entire year. Now, if I look at transits in general for July 23rd, 2027, things are already pretty tense. We have Chiron square Pluto. We have Mars in opposition to Neptune. That can cause aggression based upon illusion or disinformation. And we have Saturn making a square to Venus. People aren't going to feel happy. People are going to be wounded. Powers that be will be wounded. And Pluto here is going to be conjunct America's South Node. Now, there's some good aspects. We have, let's see, Uranus, Mars, and Pluto are forming a grand trine, and we have the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto minor grand trine still active. So there's still some beneficial aspects going on to help release tension in the world. But if we look at how America is going to be impacted, I have some specific dates in 26, 27, 2028 I'm looking at with respect to America. And as we go through these dates, things seem to get worse for America. Okay, on this date, transing Uranus will be exactly conjunct natal Uranus. That's revolutionary. That can cause a war at home or abroad. Transing Pluto will be conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis. It's specifically conjunct the south node exact to the degree. Transiting Chiron is making a pretty decent square to the natal lunar nodal axis. Transiting Saturn is square natal Pluto. That can limit the president's power or America's power. Transiting Mars is making a square to natal Jupiter and the midheaven. So that's Mars here, Jupiter, midheaven here. That can result in some aggression or violence, particularly directed or coming from the executive branch. Mars is conjunct natal ascendant. So again, that can also make America more likely to become involved in conflict or to just be very angry. Transiting Neptune is opposite the ascendant. So there could be some sort of misinformation, misunderstanding involved with all of this conflict. And transiting Chiron is making a semi-square to natal Mars, and this is exact to the degree. So this could suggest some sort of wounding through aggression. So things are getting quite tense for America on this date. And there's a heightened risk of either civil war or war abroad. Hopefully, neither will happen. Okay, another date that I think is going to be significant for America is November 8, 2027. And Pluto, in general, is conjunct the lunar nodal axis on that day. So that intensifies everything that Pluto represents: death, transformation, restructuring, whatever, power. What makes things a little bit worse is that both Mars and Pluto will be out of bounds on this day. Let's see, they're both out of bounds in the southern latitudes. That means they have both moved further south in declination than the sun ever does. And that's when they tend to act like rogue agents. And things could get dicey. Now, if we look at the aspects to America on this day, again, Uranus is making exact conjunction with natal Uranus. This is that second Uranus return. The transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis. This is like a double intensification of things. And look at this. This node is at 6 degrees Leo. The natal node is at 6 degrees Leo. And then we have transing Pluto, pretty closely conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis. It's within, let's see, this is almost 5 degrees. It's probably within a degree and a half of exact conjunction. We also have transing Pluto making a sesquiquadrate to natal Mars as exact to the degree. We have transing Jupiter conjunct natal Neptune. Jupiter expands things, and when Neptune is stimulated in America's chart, we often get delusional about all sorts of things, and we engage in aggressive activities based on those delusions. So Jupiter could magnify all of this in a bad way. And then we have Venus and Mercury just simply acting as triggers. Transiting Venus will be opposite natal Uranus. Transiting Mercury will be square natal Pluto. And 2028, we still have some tense things going on. One good thing at the beginning of the year is that transiting Chiron sextile Venus. that seems to be returning off and on, which will bring some kind of healing to America. Again, I don't know what form that healing will take place, but let's go back here a second. We first saw this happening for an extended period in the summer of 2026. So pay attention to what happens in America then. Then it reappears twice in 2027, each time lasting for a month or longer. And now in 2028, it's active at the beginning of January through the first week of March. So that's a good thing. But we also have transing Chiron, square the natal lunar nodal axis during 2 periods in 2028. That will probably intensify some wounding. We have transiting Pluto opposite the north node conjunct the south node in January and February of 2028. And from about the last week of July through all of December in 2028. This could be very, very difficult. 3 times or 2 times here that the conjunction with the south node is exact. And 3rd time over here. I'm going to look at this particular date, November 15th, 2028. And guess what? This is not long after America's next presidential election. So all of this turmoil here, all of this potential for violence and difficulty, this is all happening during the presidential campaign and election of 2028. In the world in general on this day, things are pretty tense. There are some good aspects, but they are rather fleeting, except for the sextile between Neptune and Pluto, which can be more transcendent. All of these other aspects are rather momentary. They're not going to last long. But we do have some very bad aspects that can last quite a while. So here we have Saturn conjunct Chiron. That can bring out the worst in Chiron. We have Saturn and Chiron both square natal Pluto, or square Pluto. I'm not looking at a natal chart and transit chart. These are all transits. So that can be very difficult. This is like wounding, restriction and suffering, death and transformation, all being served on the same plate. And then we have Mars making a strong square to Uranus, aggression and revolution. We have Jupiter square the lunar nodal axis. That could simply intensify whatever is going on. And on top of that, Pluto will be out of bounds in the southern latitudes. When Pluto goes out of bounds in the south, people tend to rise up more. And if we look at America's biwheel, we have Pluto conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis exactly. It's exactly conjunct the south node here. Transiting Saturn and Chiron are square this lunar nodal axis, and that is mostly exact to the degree. Saturn exact to the degree, Chiron at 5 degrees, 23 minutes, about a minute away from being exact. Transiting Neptune is opposite the natal ascendant. That can represent delusion, disinformation. And it's square natal Jupiter. Okay. Which puts it all, it's actually going to be making a square. I don't have this circled, but it's going to be making a square to this natal midheaven up here. So the executive branch could be taking actions based on misunderstandings or misinformation, suffering from delusions of various kinds. or some sort of deception from other countries could impact us. The transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be making a square to natal Saturn, and it's going to be pretty strong. So that can intensify some feelings of frustration and restriction in this country. And then this is interesting. If we look at transiting Uranus over here and transiting Mars over here, they are both making a sesquiquadrant to natal Pluto. That sesquiquadrant is going to be exact to the degree. This is also going to stimulate violence and revolution of some sort in this country. So this is a very critical date. And again, it's happening around the time of a presidential election. And one of these critical times I've shown you here happens around the midterm elections in America. If you have read the book Foundation by Isaac Asimov, or if you have watched the television series on Apple TV, then you probably know that in that science fiction story, there was a character named Harry Seldon who came up with the scientific field of psychohistory, which studies the cycles of history and can predict future events. It sounds a lot like astrology, doesn't it? Well, in the story, there are particular moments in time which are critical where things could go one way or another. Those dates were called the Seldon crisis. And those were dates when the people who worked with Harry Seldon for his vision would try and tweak events to keep the vision on track. So the specific dates I've talked about here, I think of them as Seldon crises for America. They're actually periods when things can go awry, when bad things could happen. But these are particular dates which could be particularly bad. And the tensions increase as we go from the dates in July 26th through this last one in July 28th. And I'm sorry, July 26th, I meant the year 2026 until this one in the year 2028. But keep in mind that it's not a given that bad things will happen because people have free will. If people make the best decisions, sit and meditate, elevate themselves spiritually, then we might avoid the potential crises that are shown in these charts. Now, when we get into 2029, we have Chiron making an exact square to the natal lunar nodal axis. That lasts about a month, but you can see we don't have so many serious aspects in 2029. So the tensions start to dwindle once we get back past 2028. And I believe that is my last slide. So let's see. I will stop sharing. I'm going to press the right button here. There we go. Stop share. And I'm back. So, hope you found that interesting. America is going through interesting times right now. And in that sense, over the next few years, they're going to get only more interesting. But it's possible that good things will happen too. And remember, free will is powerful. We can make good choices, which can help us avoid a lot of these potential disasters. And let's hope that we do. And I have some more videos coming up. I'll talk about how the Saturn-Neptune conjunction might impact Russia. And we'll talk about the good aspects in this Uranus-Neptune-Pluto minor or mini grand trine, which is going to be intertwined with Saturn and Neptune. And it can help put us on a good track instead of a bad one. So I hope you join me for more videos. I hope you enjoyed this one. And for now, I'll just say so long and be well.